Hi, I'm Sharon Pratt, host of IPPH On Air State of Play. IPPH, the Institute of Politics, Policy, and History, housed on the campus of the University of the District of Columbia, with the mission of rediscovering the history of Washington, D.C., while drilling down on touchstone issues of the day, issues that have perennially plagued our nation. And because of the very consequential nature of this election cycle, IPPH launched the special program, State of Play. And the notion was that State of Play with our distinguished co-anchors would do a deeper dive on the issues that would determine the outcome of this election. But because of the interest and enthusiasm of our IPPH On Air audience, we have decided to continue State of Play. However, we're going to take a brief hiatus. Today will be the last one of 2020 and relaunch in January 2021 before the inauguration of President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris. So for our last 2020 State of Play, we have Karen Tramontano. Karen was the former Deputy Chief of Staff to President William Jefferson Clinton. She's an international political analyst and co-chair of the Senior Advisory Committee for IPPH. Welcome back, Karen.
Thank you, Mayor. Good to be here.
We also have the Reverend Mark Thompson. Mark is the host of the podcast, Make It Plain. He's a regular on MSNBC and also a distinguished member of the Senior Advisory Committee for IPPH. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Mayor. Glad to be back.
So we continue to have great events taking place in our community, and none more devastating, I guess you could say, is than the pandemic. And as we look out over the horizon, though it looks pretty bleak right now, we do have several vaccines on the horizon. But the challenge is administering these vaccines. So if you look back over the arc of history, Karen, from, let's say, President Woodrow Wilson, who had to deal with the 1918 Spanish flu, to where we are today, have we ever had to face anything as daunting as administering a vaccine twice conceivably to every person in the United States, ultimately every person on the planet? And are we up to it? You've been there in the White House. Are we up to it?
Well, it is very daunting because when you do look back over history, we've had a number of pandemics, but nothing. I mean, we've had diphtheria, polio, as you said, the H1N1 Spanish flu, but nothing other than the Spanish flu has come to the numbers of infections and the death rate that we are experiencing here in the United States. And when you also look back over the arc of history on vaccinations, you know, the robust effort was really around childhood diseases. You know, a century ago, children were 20% death rate for children. And robust efforts were made to eradicate measles, mumps, rubella, et cetera. And so there became this system of school vaccinations, and now a system of vaccinations at birth and vaccinations 2 or 3 months after birth and in your pre-kindergarten to first grade. So the system is out of touch with the reality of what we have to address right now. And the system that is totally connected with vaccines, all of those people, physicians, nurses, healthcare professionals, are trying to save people's lives. So I think the first wave where healthcare workers are going to get immunized, there's a vision for that. And there's a system for that. You can see that happening. And then you can see older Americans being vaccinated who are in institutional nursing homes and nursing kits, because there's a system there as well. But we have never encountered anything like 15 million people infected and hundreds, will be near 300,000 people dying, and have to administer over 300 million vaccinations. So I really I think there is good news that we have these vaccines, but I do not see us gearing up a nation that won't even wear masks right now and are resisting all the little steps that need to be taken. I don't see us gearing up to get in mass lines at arenas and other institutions to receive this vaccine. And I'm quite concerned that we're not up to the task.
Yeah, of course, Ron Klain is going to be the president-elect's chief of staff, and he at least has been very thoughtful in this space. You know, I'm having a little trouble hearing you. I don't know if it's just me. It could be a reflection of age, but I just wanted to point that out. Mark, I'm going to ask you, sort of in keeping with what Karen just said. I know Unidos US and the NAACP did a survey to try to get a sense of whether the Black community, Latinx communities were also open to being vaccinated. And they discovered only 14% of Black Americans trusted or had confidence in the efficacy of the vaccines. And in the Latinx community, only 34%. And we've got to get everybody vaccinated. You know, what do you think people can do about this, Mark? And do you see any leadership around this issue?
That is a little scary to me, Mayor. I think there has been an underestimation of the growing anti-vax movement that's out here. That social media, like a lot of other things, has continued to build. Social media foments the anti-mask environment. There are ways to do that on social media. Social media foments the anti-vax environment. And, you know, with the way social media is ubiquitous in all of our lives, I'm not sure if social media is, or if social media has been organized yet well enough to do what Karen's talking about, and that is to actually promote vaccinations in a logistical, in a well laid out logistical fashion. So that's a little bit scary. I don't know that there is any leadership. I fear that those who are skeptical may be the loudest voices in the room. And I think we have to be worried about that. I think that especially too, just the visual of thousands of people standing in line for mass vaccinations. I think we know about the history and the fear and the paranoia that comes with that type of thing. And it's tragic because we know people just can't walk around with this vaccine and continue to die and risk their lives. I think the leadership has to come in examples. So that if first frontline workers, healthcare workers, and whatnot are getting the vaccine, hopefully that will give enough people a comfort level in the Black and brown communities to do it themselves. Other luminaries, maybe even celebrities, people with integrity that people trust will have to step out there and take it and let people know that it's okay. But I don't think that's an overnight process. So I'm actually a little worried about that. And just before we began talking, I just did a little perusal of Twitter quickly. And I mean, it's out there. People already say, don't take it. It's not safe. They're going to do something to us. And I don't know exactly if there's one particular voice or one singular voice, or I don't even know what the collective voices are yet, other than those who are going to step out and lead by example. Otherwise, I don't know what the collective voices are yet to kind of change that tide. So we'll just have to see.
Well, we have 3 former presidents who said they'll take it, which will help, I think. Obama, Clinton, and Bush. That ought to help to encourage people that it's safe. Of course, they may not believe that the one they got is the one they get, but that's a step in the right direction, let's hope. This is an issue that's worthy of following up on because this is an awfully important issue in terms of getting back to normal. But while I'm talking, I'll engage with you here, Mark. There is also a lot of conversation around who will provide the leadership in the Biden administration. And in particular, there's concern really among all of the communities of color, and particularly the African American community. And a lot of it comes from what he said on the night that it was recognized he was the president-elect. And in his very gracious acceptance speech, he said no community had ever had his back quite like the African American community, and he would have the backs of the African American community as president. And yet there have been very few, other than, I guess, the UN ambassador, who are cabinet level African-American appointees. I believe that's right. Even Clyburn is sort of fussing about it, or expressing concern, I should say. Mark, do you think that people are being premature in their judgment of President-elect Biden?
I don't think so, because look, we all know politics. Karen's been involved in administrations and transitions. A lot of decisions are being made right now. And if you don't get in on the front end, you get left behind. And people I think are making some fair and objective criticisms in the African American community, in the Latino community, and other communities. I was in discussions last week with Native Americans who feel somewhat left out because the narrative has been that Cindy McCain won Arizona for Biden. Native Americans are saying, no, we did that. They turned out voters. I've even heard from Asian American groups who also raising concerns about not getting a meeting with the transition. I was not aware until last week that Asian American civil rights groups mobilized almost 300,000 Asian Americans to vote in Georgia to help Biden win there. So I think all of them have a legitimate claim. All of these groups have a legitimate claim to wanting to be heard. And there are a couple of things. There's leadership, there are leadership positions, but to date, none of these groups or representatives of these groups have even been granted meetings with the Biden-Harris incoming administration. And that's tremendous cause for concern. I think that's a ball that has been dropped and one that's easily resolved. Now, Derek Johnson was on my podcast, Make It Plain, today, the NAACP, the president of the NAACP. Apparently, finally, the Biden-Harris administration has scheduled a meeting with the legacy civil rights organizations, NAACP, Urban League, et cetera. But others still want to meet. And I think that, if they would simply grant those meetings, they hear some of those concerns. But what you also summarized, Mayor, is also accurate too. Decision-making, cabinet level positions. There is still a lack of some of the people of color that many of the advocacy groups would like to see. And I think they're going to have to fix that. Lastly, I don't think it's premature, especially because if not for these constituencies of color, Biden never would have won the presidency in the first place.
Yeah. And before I sort of delve into who's going to be in the room when decisions are made, do you think Tandon will get confirmed, Karen?
Well, I think it's going to be a tough one. Republicans have no passion for being consistent and care not that they will be hypocritical. I mean, they are complaining about Neera's tweets when we had the chief Twitter for the last 4 years. So who, let's just say, was not kind in those messages. So she's got a lot of support, among Democrats. She does have support among moderate Republicans as well. She's smart. I think it's going to be tough, but I think the administration is going to go to the mat for her.
Okay. Now, as somebody who has been in the room when those decisions are made, cabinet positions are terribly important because often they are in that room. But on a day-to-day basis, it's really often, is it not, the people on the staff in the West Wing? And who will be there to look out for the interest of communities of color in the Biden-Harris team? Who will be in that room when real decisions are made? Karen, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, it's a very good question that you raised, Mayor. And right now, former member of Congress, Cedric Richmond, who was chair of the Black Caucus, I believe, is and will be in the room. But the Ron Klain, Steve Ricchetti, and others with whom I've worked, and who are professional. Not only that, who understand the core issues that we're talking about here, the core issues that COVID has brought to bear, the inequities, the core issues that the deaths of George Floyd and many others have brought to bear. And the vice president president-elect and vice president-elect are very cognizant of the policy issues that have to be prioritized. And it is important to have voices there. So not all those posts are filled. Domestic policy posts is not filled, and several other posts within the White House are not filled. And I hope that they hear the cries that Mark has talked about, that it has to look like America in that room. I mean,
Right.
the thing that is so clear, that there is such a hunger. The last 4 years, it was so what not America is about and what not America looks like in that White House and in the cabinet. So there is a hunger, there is an urgency about it, about making change. And the president-elect and the vice president-elect have to, and I think the vice president-elect, who has announced her staff, has done a very good job of making sure that voices of men and women of color are heard and are present in the decision making. So I think there's time, but I certainly understand the urgency that is there. And I think it's because all of us have lived these last 4 years, as I say, with a hunger for fairness and a hunger for what an administration should look like.
Well, all of it is chemistry. We've all been there. So you got to have chemistry with the people on the staff for you to want them to be in the room. I mean, you may say you would like to have everybody in the room. So Richmond, he was an early supporter of Biden. So I assume he'll always be in the room. I would assume because Biden played such a significant role with President Obama, he will see to it that Kamala Harris is in the room. I would not assume that somebody on Kamala Harris's staff necessarily will be in the room. For example, were people on Vice President Gore's staff in the room when President Clinton was making decisions?
Oh, yes, which is how I got to know Ron Klain quite well. President Clinton and Vice President Gore, at the time had a very good and close working relationship, and the staffs worked well together. So if there was a meeting that the chief of staff called, certainly our daily meetings, our decision-making meetings, Ron Klain was right there, and continued to play a very important role. And it's essential that if Vice President Harris is going to play the role that Vice President Biden played vis-a-vis President Obama, that her staff be fully integrated into the core White House staff.
Okay. Well, let's also think about, what kind of support the Biden-Harris administration will have in the Senate. And of course, we have the January 5th runoff. And when we've discussed it before, we all sort of agreed it was a steep climb. But now that we've had Giuliani and others raising questions about the reliability of the electoral process in Georgia, do you think the Democrats have a better shot at it in Georgia now, Mark?
They must, but better may still not be proportionally enough. I think the best advice is not to take for granted what Giuliani and Roger Stone and others are saying about not trusting the process. There's a whole movement discouraging people from voting in Georgia. Trump went to Georgia this weekend to try to reverse that and encourage people to vote. But I mean, it's weird. You're right. He's got his team saying that the results are unreliable, the process is rigged. So why would they expect people to go back and vote again? So I think it increases our chances. I think we have to, tuck that away. But still, people still have to go out and be mobilized to vote, as though there will be a full turnout, just like in any other election. I think we have to do that and still hope for the best. But it must be very confusing for Republicans in Georgia right now. They have one group of people saying don't vote, and the president saying everything's rigged, but vote anyway. So hopefully that confusion and those mixed messages will help us out in Georgia. And frankly, I think the debate last night, the debate between Loeffler and Warnock and Ossoff and the chair, will also be helpful as well. There was only a chair in place of Perdue, and Loeffler, it was a broken record, and there was just still every response was the same. Speaking of Reverend Warnock, not even referring to him as Reverend, but speaking of him in a pejorative fashion, using pejorative terms. So I hope that message got through as well to the voters in Georgia, as well as the messaging that the process is rigged and no good. I hope that will tip the scales just enough for Warnock and Ossoff to win, and for Democrats to win the Senate.
Karen, I'm going to ask you also about this whole notion of distrusting the electoral process that's been embraced by a good swath of the Republican Party. But right now, in terms of the January 5th runoffs, I assume that when people are speaking, when you bring in surrogates and so forth, you're really just speaking to your own base. There's no persuading anybody. Or do you think I'm wrong in the January 5th election?
So I think it's a very good question, in that clearly there was crossover by probably independents, maybe some Republicans, to Biden. Because when you go down ballot, people then voted Republican, right? Which I think is one of the reasons why some of those congressional seats were lost by the Democrats. So I think the question always is, where are those voters going to go now, and are they persuadable? Clearly, they were persuaded to vote for Biden over Trump. And can they be persuaded to vote for the two Democrats? I think Mark's point on the debates, I was watching both of those debates. I was amazed, and I think also I've had it right, of the sense of entitlement of Senator Perdue not even to show up to answer questions. And I think the way independent voters will look at this is, it's somewhat insulted that you don't even come to the debate to respond to inquiries. And similarly, with the Loeffler debate, where no questions were answered. And again, I think that puts independent voters off a bit, and maybe just enough to cross back over. Remember, she was appointed, so she really hasn't, she ran in this runoff in a Republican primary, but she really hasn't faced the voters of the whole state of Georgia. So I think, look, single messages are always better than mixed messages. And right now, Loeffler and Perdue are trying to really thread a very difficult needle with not a lot of light on. So, I think, we've got a chance, and we've got to organize this, as Mark said, and not, take our foot off the metal.
Well, a lot of the confusion is caused by Giuliani, who is now dealing with COVID at a hospital in DC. But he and the other lawyers for Trump have really suggested that no one should vote. No one should vote for Perdue and Loeffler because you can't trust the electoral process where even Republicans run it. And then you had a similar kind of incident in the state of Michigan. Now, these just out of the way, outlier kind of experiences, or is there an element within our country now really embracing the notion, not just anti-government, but anti our democratic process? Is that a source of concern for you? How about you, Karen?
Oh, I cannot believe what is going on in Michigan. The fact that people armed are going to, I think it was the lieutenant governor's home while she's decorating her Christmas tree, and nobody's doing anything about it. I mean, that is unheard of in this country. And I must say that if any other group other than white people with weapons were outside of that house, we would all be in jail right now.
Right.
No questions asked.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is so clear, what, and I think the last count that Washington Post did, only 27 elected Republicans have acknowledged that Joe Biden is the president-elect. I mean, we are in a whole nother space right now. And I think using the fear of Trump is just become the biggest and lamest excuse for Republicans not to stand up and defend our democracy.
Yeah. What do you think, Mark?
I would agree. In specific answer to your question, though, I don't think this is going away. I think we have to look at the character we're dealing with. Donald Trump has been a hustler and a huckster for decades. Trump University, Trump Steaks, Trump hotels, Trump wine, everything. This is the latest commodity, selling falsehoods about democracy. And they are raising money off of it. So they're making a lot of this up. They're pulling a lot of money in. There are rumors that at best, he plans to hold a rally on Inauguration Day to announce his 2024 candidacy. At worst, the rumor is he's actually going to have Air Force One fly him there before noon while he still has control over it. So I don't think this is going anywhere. And there's still the rumors of him wanting to form his own network to rival Fox News. This is something that I think that is going to be with us for a little while. This assailing of the democratic process. I think our side though, must seize the moment to do our own reform electoral process and get rid of the electoral college altogether. And I know that may be ambitious, but if we're going to have a debate and a back and forth between Biden and Trump somewhere still on the scene about the democratic process, let's deal with the reality of the electoral college. But I don't think this is going anywhere. I don't think the threats, the craziness, the militia, the Proud Boys, the Boogaloo movement, I don't think any of them are going to go anywhere. And they're going to get worse as we approach the midterms and the general in 2024. Because if, things occur in their natural progression, the Democratic nominee in 2024 will be Vice President Kamala Harris, a woman of color, an African-American, Asian, Caribbean woman. And we know what they have planned for her. They've already given us a preview of that. So I think things, unfortunately, only going to get uglier. But the one thing I'll say, Mayor and Karen, is this.
Well,
no, and I was talking to
right,
a
yeah,
colleague.
well, no, and I agree with Karen, though. I don't think they can always use Trump as the cover. I think there is, for whatever reason, a sense that, representative democracy isn't working for everybody. And I think that's a source of real concern. Well, we're almost out of time, but I guess I can ask you this. We're going to have a virtual inauguration. It worked pretty well for the convention. Are you hopeful that we're going to have a pretty good inauguration as we say goodbye? Karen?
Yeah, I think it has to be virtual. I think there'll be a dais and some platform from which the president-elect, after he's sworn in, will give an inaugural address. But I don't think there's going to be a crowd, on the mall. I think all of us are going to be warm in our houses, looking at our computers.
Right. How about you, Mark? I think you think the same, I bet.
Yeah, and it's safer. I can remember, as young as I may look, I'm old enough to remember Ronald Reagan's second inaugural, and it was canceled, if you all recall, because it was a terrible blizzard in DC, and it was about 30 below zero. I'm exaggerating, but it was okay. It was a small group of people, and it was over and done with. I think that's necessary, and I think Biden has to set an example as he gets ready to lead the nation out of COVID.
Okay, well, as always, you guys are terrific and provide wonderful insights. And we really appreciate this being our last broadcast for 2020 of State of Play. We will reconvene in 2021, as I said, at least a few days before the inauguration of President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris. So thank you all. Thank you to our IPPH On Air State of Play audience. Follow us at Politics Policy History, as well as Politics Policy One. Until next time in 2021, Happy New Year early. I'm Sharon Pratt, host of IPPH On Air State of Play.